Hey everyone, my name is Alex Purnomo. I'm the pastor of Doonside Anglican Church. Covenant is one of the most important concepts in the Bible as a whole. It has to do with the relationship between God and human beings. If we want to be in a relationship with God, if we seek a relationship with God, if we want to maintain a relationship with God, it is important to understand the concept of covenant. As we explore the covenant relationship enjoyed between God and people in the past, we further appreciate the covenant relationship with God that we enjoy in the present, both in terms of its privileges and its responsibilities. What does the Bible teach about the covenant? What is the role of the covenant in God's purpose as that purpose unfolds throughout the Bible? That is the focus of this series. I believe the best way to study the Bible is to go to a particular book or letter in the Bible and then just read and study that book or letter one at a time prayerfully. But sometimes I find it really helpful tracing a particular concept or theme, in this case the concept of covenant, throughout the Bible from beginning to end, trying to understand how it unfolds throughout the Bible and how it contributes to the big picture or the main story of the Bible, which is the history of God's salvation of the world that progresses towards Jesus Christ and culminates in Jesus Christ. What I seek to do in this series is to understand the biblical theology of covenant. This series is based on the book by Paul Williamson titled Sealed with an Oath, Covenant in God's Unfolding Purpose. In this video series, I would not usually go into too much detail. If you want to study this topic in more depth, I recommend that you read the book or other resources that I put in the description below this video. If we study how the word covenant is used in the Bible, we would find that covenant is used to speak of certain kind of agreements, both between human beings and between God and human beings. Paul Williamson did a study of all the covenants in the Bible. He finds that what makes a covenant unique compared to other kinds of agreements is that covenant is always sealed with an oath. He says that a covenant is a solemn commitment guaranteeing promises or obligations undertaken by one or both parties, sealed with an oath. In this series, we would look at 7 covenants: the universal covenant with Noah and his family and the creation, the covenants with Abraham and his seed, the national covenants with Israel and its priestly representatives, the royal covenant with David and his seed, and the new covenant with a spiritually renewed and reconstituted Israel. How about Adam? Some people believe that any relationship involving God must have a covenant. They believe the first covenant in the Bible is the covenant between God and the first human, Adam, in the first 2 chapters of the book of Genesis. But is that correct? That is the focus of the rest of this video. Now some people may ask, does it matter? What difference does it make whether there was a covenant with Adam or not? The answer is yes, it does matter, because it is related to other questions we have about God's character. Did Adam ever have a relationship with God that is not regulated through a covenant? Or was he always in a covenant with God? Has there ever been any other way to have a relationship with God apart from through a covenant? A covenant is of a formal and legal nature. If God only ever relates to people by using a covenant, that tells us something about God's character too. Some people do believe that any relationship involving God must have a covenant. Thus, they believe that as soon as Adam is created by God, he must be on some sort of probationary covenant with God in this divine sanctuary called the Garden of Eden. Sadly, as we know in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve disobeyed God and sinned against God, and therefore Adam failed in his probationary covenant. But is it correct that God made a covenant with Adam? The problem with this view is that nowhere in the story of Adam do we find things that are characteristics of a covenant in the rest of the Bible. In Adam's story, the word covenant is not even used. Now, just because the word covenant is absent doesn't mean that it is not a covenant. But the word covenant does not occur at all in Genesis until the Noah story in chapter 6. There must be a good reason for it. More importantly, The other characteristics of a covenant are also absent in the story of Adam. Nobody made any oath, and God never gave any promise to Adam that he would have eternal life if he should obey God's command. Some people point to Hosea 6 verse 7, where we read, "As at Adam they have broken the covenant, they were unfaithful to me there." Is that verse saying that there was a covenant between God and Adam? Not really, because the word Adam here is not likely to refer to Adam the first human, but rather the name of the first town that Israel reached after crossing into the Promised Land. See Joshua chapter 3. How about straight after Adam and Eve fell into sin? Is there a covenant there? In chapter 3 of Genesis, we find a promise from God about the seed of the woman who would crush the head of the serpent and be killed in the process. That is, of course, a promise that has been ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Does that promise mean that there was a covenant with Adam in Genesis 3? Not really, because this promise was especially made to the serpent rather than directly to Adam and Eve. We cannot rightly call it a covenant with Adam. So there is insufficient warrant from the biblical text to see any covenant between God and Adam. This suggests that before Adam and Eve disobeyed God, when their relationship with God is in its unspoiled state, there is no need to formalize or legalize the relationship by using a covenant. This means that there was a time when human beings had a relationship with God without a covenant. At least the first human beings did. Their relationship with God was not established by a covenant. But they are not the only ones. As we will see in the 7 covenants throughout the Bible in this series, the biblical order is relationship, then covenant, rather than covenant, hence relationship. God was clearly in relationship with Abraham from Genesis 12, yet it is not until Genesis 15 that God formalizes that relationship through a covenant. Similarly, God was in relationship with Israel before the covenant he formally established with them on Mount Sinai. Likewise, God was in relationship with David long before he sealed that relationship by covenant in 2 Samuel 7. And in Genesis 6, God was in relationship with Noah before sealing that relationship by covenant immediately after the flood. All these covenants between God and human beings in the Bible show that a covenant does not establish the relationship between God and humans. The relationship already exists even without a covenant. But what a covenant does is, it seals that relationship or formalizes that relationship. As I said earlier, the biblical order is relationship, then covenant, rather than covenant, hence relationship. God's purpose for the world is not just to restore the relationship between God and human beings, but the renewal of all things, including creation itself. In Romans 8, verse 21, the Apostle Paul reminds us that one day the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. It is for this purpose that each of the covenants between God and human beings in the Bible is put in place. This purpose is the glue that binds all the biblical covenants together. Each of the covenants we will see in this series simply takes us one step closer towards the realization of that divine purpose. Because of Adam's failure, God's universal purpose for his creation was disrupted. So much so that God must undo his creation and begin again, as we will see in the story of Noah, which we will look at in the next video in this series. If you find this video helpful, please like or subscribe to our channel. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. In the name of Christ, Amen.